Hi, and welcome to the channel. This video is kind of a retrospective overlook at Arches National Park. It includes profiles of a half dozen day hikes located within the confines of the park. And all this footage was shot more than 3 decades ago, so it's been a while. Back then, the visitor center, it was just an adobe-looking brick building with maybe the size of a 2 or 3 car garage, something like that. Travel technology had not exploded. The internet was not a thing. Drones were not a thing. If you wanted an aerial shot, you did it with a fixed-wing aircraft with the door open, flying 1,000 feet above ground level. The town of Moab. The town of Moab was just a kind of a dusty desert town on the banks of the Colorado River. I think back then there was one chain hotel. It was a Best Western, I believe that's what it was. So there have been changes outside the park, but the park itself is on a different timeline. The balanced rock, still balanced, nothing's changed there. But instead of me yakking about it, why don't we all just take a look, all right?
High on the Colorado Plateau in eastern Utah, massive sandstone cliffs, fragile rock formations, and scores of graceful arches tell a fantastic story of titanic movements in the Earth's crust. These prehistoric events exposed primeval rock formations to the strange mutations wrought by erosion and weathering. Here, the forces of nature have exposed an array of rocky features which provide us with an insight into the origins of this unique landscape. Arches National Park is a geologic storybook open for all to read. The storyline is exposed in the marvelous shapes and brilliant colors found all along the main park road, but more especially on a series of well-defined trails located throughout the park. Start from the Visitor Center, located 5 miles north of the town of Moab, Utah, on U.S. Highway 191, up the Serpentine roadway into the park for a little more than a mile to the first turnout. Here you can plainly see the Moab Fault, the result of a 2,500-foot movement in the Earth's crust that took place more than 5 million years ago. All of the layers of rock on the right side of the screen are composed of younger layers that once lay above all of the rock on the left side. At about the same time, upward forces from deep within the Earth caused nearby rock formations to crack in long parallel lines. This first step in the formation of natural arches is most evident in the Eagle Park area at the north end of the park. Over thousands of centuries, wind, water, and other forces of erosion widened the cracks, resulting in freestanding fins of rock. The continuing forces of wind and water undercut weaker portions of the porous sandstone until the fins wore through in some locations. These openings slowly enlarged into arches. Within the park, there are more than 1,500 arches ranging from just a few feet across to a thin, unsupported ribbon of rock longer than a football field called Landscape Arch. The story continues as cracks widen, rocks fall, arches deteriorate, and eventually collapse. The most celebrated rock formations in the park are the arches themselves, named by early settlers in a pioneering, no-nonsense fashion. Double Arch is just that, Two massive spans joined at one end. The north window is located a few hundred yards north of the south window. And Partition Arch is simply an arch with a stone partition through it. In addition to the arches, the park contains balanced rocks whimsically defying gravity, the jumble of rock in the fiery furnace and Devil's Garden areas, and giant freestanding rock fins of Entrata sandstone. The massive Tower of Babel takes on a whole new dimension when viewed from its narrow west face. Today, Arches National Park is a desert, normally receiving less than 10 inches of rain each year. Much of that rain falls during brief, sometimes intense summertime thunderstorms that continue to erode the sandstone landscape. Dry washes become fast-flowing streams that each year carry tons of sand to the Colorado River, which borders the park on the east. Always check with park personnel for current weather and trail conditions. Before setting out for even short day hikes, be aware that this is a region of climatic extremes. Summertime temperatures often exceed 100 degrees, and most trails offer limited shade. Sun protection and water are musts. It is recommended that you consume 1 quart of water for each mile hiked, particularly during the summer. To the uninformed observer, the landscape is a monochromatic panorama of rock and sand. However, Arches is much more than that. For those who take a closer look, it's a special place, supporting a unique community of plants and wildlife. The foundation of this ecosystem is the fragile, dark-crusted soil found throughout much of the park. The spongy microbiotic soil helps retain moisture and is an important mechanism for generating nitrogen in the soil, which is required for healthy plant growth. Unfortunately, this soil is as fragile as it is critical. Growth is extremely slow, and damage from tire tracks to footsteps may take years to recover. That's why it's important to confine human activity to establish trails in this extraordinary place.
I don't know if this is going to take in the sun.
A good place to begin hiking in Arches is the Park Avenue Trail. The trailhead is located just off the main park road, 2 miles from the visitor center. Walk 100 yards from the parking lot to the wheelchair-accessible viewpoint for a stunning view of a small canyon framed by a sandstone fin that reminded early visitors of the New York skyline, thus the name Park Avenue. The one-way distance to the courthouse tower's parking lot is 1 mile. Allow at least 45 minutes for this awe-inspiring hike. The trail begins from the viewpoint with a descent of about 150 feet down a series of rough steps to the sandy canyon floor. There, the trail follows a series of small rock piles called cairns through low-growing ash and juniper trees. The junipers provide what little shade can be found on this trail during midday hours. Look off to your left on the west wall. See if you can imagine the ancient Egyptian queen Nefertiti sitting high above the scene below. Halfway down the trail, at the junction with a side canyon coming in from the left, the sand underfoot gives way to smooth, slick rock polished by centuries of rushing floodwaters. Look for potholes in the path formed by these swirling torrents. After rainstorms, these bodies of water can teem with life as tadpoles, shrimp, and other minute creatures seize the opportunity to fulfill their life cycles. Emerging from the deep portion of the canyon, the courthouse towers formations, including the Three Gossips, the Tower of Babel, and the Organ, come into full view directly ahead. The open panorama of rock and sky provides a counterpoint to the high rock plateau on the left and the massive sandstone fin on the right that has formed this fantastic avenue in stone. Hikers can either be picked up by other members of their party at the courthouse tower's parking lot or retrace their steps to the trailhead. Another pleasant hike is located in the windows section, a short 20-minute drive from the courthouse towers area. From the parking lot at the windows section, 3 large arches are located on an easy trail with a round trip of less than a mile. The first arch is known as the north window. From the trailhead, the gravel trail gradually rises to the short spur which leads directly to the opening in the north window. From this opening, look to the east to catch sight of the rim of the canyon that the Colorado River has cut into the distant plateau. Return to the main trail and turn left for a short distance until the trail branches to the base of Turret Arch, with its rocky turret looming above multiple arches. From the junction with the Turret Arch side trail, the well-traveled main trail continues on a short distance to the south window. Here, more ambitious hikers can climb up into this arch to marvel at its 115-foot span. Return to the parking lot where the trailhead for the next destination is located. From the trailhead, Double Arch is almost lost in Elephant Butte, a larger rock formation that is studded with numerous caves. The quarter-mile sandy trail winds through scrub oaks and twisted juniper trees to the base of this unique formation. Double Arch is actually 2 vertical arches separated at the top by a horizontal or pothole arch. This pothole arch is a product of erosion caused by rainwater pouring off the top of Elephant Butte. A scale of reference is sometimes difficult to establish in this grand landscape, but the view from the base of the arch leaves no doubt as to the immense size of this unique formation. As you return to the parking lot, look to catch the stone parade of elephants, frozen in time in their march toward Double Arch. The Devil's Garden area is located at the end of the main park road, 18 miles from the visitor center. Allow at least 4 hours for the next, more substantial hike that leads to 8 major arches found along a series of trails that begin at the Devil's Garden trailhead parking lot. Note that water and restrooms are available only at the trailhead and nearby picnic area. This particular hike will cover 5 miles round trip, taking hikers to the base of Tunnel, Pine Tree, Landscape, Wall, Partition, and Double O arches. The starting point of this popular trail follows a gap between 2 vertical sandstone fins, the product of centuries of nature's upheavals and subsequent erosion. Along the trail, look for the accumulations of sand that have been trapped between fins by the forces of wind and water. The first portion of the trail is not difficult, but there are enough ups and downs and stair-step sections to make wheelchair travel difficult, if not impossible. A quarter of a mile from the trailhead, take the short branch trail to the right to Pine Tree and Tunnel Arches. The trail drops down a small hill and then divides again. Follow the right branch for 100 yards or so and look toward the rock wall on your right. Tunnel Arch, a smooth tunnel-shaped opening in the rock high above, dominates the scene. Return to the Pine Tree Arch branch in the trail and continue just a few hundred yards to the end of a box canyon. Here at the head of the canyon lies a craggy arch with its namesake pine tree growing from the bottom of the opening. Imagine the differences in the combination of forces that shape the sharp surfaces of Pine Tree Arch as opposed to the smooth circular shape of Tunnel Arch, located just a short distance away. Retrace the path to the main trail and proceed on through orange slick rock formations glowing in the desert sun. Toward strange rock formations piercing the distant skyline. 3/4 of a mile from the trailhead, look to the left for the first sight of Landscape Arch, nearly lost in the rounded shapes behind it. As the sandy branch trail rises toward the base of the arch, hikers can begin to get a true sense of the splendor of this arch, soaring more than the length of a football field through the azure blue desert sky. Beyond Landscape Arch, the trail becomes moderately difficult. The gravel path is replaced by soft sand and rocky steps, rising and falling with the steeper terrain. Soon the trail passes through a narrow passage hemmed in on the right by large boulders that have fallen during the formation of Wall Arch. The arch dominates the scene, looming high above the trail as a silent testimonial to the forces of nature. This portion of the trail just beyond Wall Arch provides some shade and an opportunity to rest before climbing to the top of a small plateau. The going is steep, and the footing can be slippery as grains of sand slip against the sandstone surface of the rock. Once atop the plateau, the trail branches to Navajo and Partition arches. From this vantage point, the distant La Salle Mountains loom in the distance. Follow the trail along a rock wall and through a grove of juniper trees to Partition Arch, with its sandstone wall dividing the two openings. Note how each opening frames a distant landscape. Back at the main trail, continue across a flat stretch which leads to a rocky prominence in the background. The trail crosses the top of this thin rock wall, affording an excellent view of Finn Canyon. Be aware that there are no guardrails, handholds, or fences here. This is not a place for unsupervised children or those who are uncomfortable with heights or drop-offs. After crossing the Finn, the trail makes a sharp turn to the left to the last major arch on this hike, Double O Arch. This is a good place to rest before starting the 2-mile hike back to the trailhead. The most famous arch in the park is Delicate Arch. Mid-afternoon is a good time to drive to the Delicate Arch viewpoint. A short, steep trail leads from this parking lot to the edge of a canyon which separates the viewer from the arch by more than a quarter of a mile. The canyon cannot be crossed. However, it is the best vantage point for viewing Delicate Arch other than the moderately difficult 3-mile round-trip hike to the base of the arch. Allow at least 3 hours for the Delicate Arch trail that starts from the Wolf Ranch parking area. You must provide your own water since there is no water available at the trailhead. The trail begins with a short walk to the remote spot where John Wolfe, a disabled Civil War veteran, lived from 1888 to 1912. Here he built a one-room cabin and a root cellar on the banks of Saltwash. His reasons for settling here are unknown, but perhaps it was the horrors of war that led him to this isolated homestead. Leave the Wolf Ranch by crossing the footbridge across Saltwash and begin this moderately difficult trail. Be prepared for an elevation change of just over 500 feet. The trail crosses exposed rock faces with almost no shade. Take at least 1 quart of water per person for this hike. The first challenge is a series of switchbacks to the top of a rocky ridge. From this ridge, hikers can look back at the Wolf Ranch and get a better sense of just how desolate it is now and how remote it must have been over 100 years ago. Looking ahead, the trail leads toward a distant rock face. The scale of this terrain is hard to comprehend without familiar frames of reference, such as these hikers looking like human miniatures on an alien landscape. Descend from the first ridge and cross a draw which centuries of rainfall have sculpted into depressions known as potholes. Here desert plants thrive in an otherwise arid plateau. Just beyond this splash of green, it may be a good idea to take a brief rest before heading up the steepest section of the trail. While climbing, don't forget to look back. The view is dramatic, and the feeling of accomplishment will help a tired individual get over the last part of the rock face. Once the trail enters an area supporting scattered junipers and pinyon pines at the top of the bald rock portion, the trail levels out and even includes a welcome downhill section. Emerging from the wooded area, the shadowy presence of a 100-foot cliff marks the beginning of the last section of the trail. At the foot of this cliff, the trail wraps around to the right, and then up a series of stone steps to the final 200 yards of the trail. This short section of the trail had to be blasted out of the towering rock wall. The view from this section is spectacular, but it may be a little extreme for those who are not comfortable with heights. Look across the canyon for shadows that provide evidence of continuing arch formation in the towering sandstone cliff. After clearing the rock wall on the right, hikers reach their final destination, the magnificent Entrada Sandstone Arch soaring above its own red rock amphitheater. Late afternoon crowds gather to watch as lengthening shadows and deepening colors turn the landscape into a glowing portrait of this spectacular land. One note of caution to visitors waiting for sunsets: it's a long way back to the car, and the trail can be difficult to follow in low light or moonlight. So bring a flashlight just in case. It's time to leave this amazing land. Time to leave it to the continuing change wrought by the forces of nature. Time to leave, only to look forward to returning once more to the stunning landscape that is Arches National Park.
If you enjoyed this program, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the series.